I'm Adam.
And I'm Chester.
And this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way. Hey, Chester, did you like going to school?
Fun fact, my mom was a teacher.
I guess that could qualify as a fun fact, but it doesn't really answer my question.
I guess you could say that I enjoyed it enough to keep going to college for a long time.
Hey, I did the same thing.
What about you? Do you like going to school?
I loved elementary. In fact, I still go there every single day. Why do you think I teach at one? In today's book, we meet a very special teacher that wasn't quite like any other. Let's get started. Midnight Teacher, Lily Ann Granderson and Her Secret School by Janet Halfmann, illustrated by London Ladd. From a young age, Lily Ann Eliza Cox believed the path to freedom was through education. Born into slavery around 1821 in Petersburg, Virginia, Lily Ann was the youngest of 4 sisters. When she was around 4 years old, her mother died, and Lily Ann was sold to a family in Kentucky. Young Lily Ann worked in the master's house. When the adults weren't watching, the master's children often played school with her. They then found an old ragged blue-back speller for Lily Ann to use and keep. While it was not illegal in Kentucky for enslaved people to learn to read and write, it was strongly discouraged. Lily Ann knew to hide her blue-back speller in her pocket and practice her letters when no one was watching. She secretly traced words in the dirt of the garden and the spilled flour on the kitchen table as she worked. She was proud when she was finally able to write down her thoughts and read the Bible by herself. Lily Ann read everything she could get her hands on. Through newspapers lying around, she learned the places of North where slavery had been abolished. She longed for freedom too. As Lily Ann's reading and writing skills improved, she wanted to share her knowledge with others. She found the perfect opportunity on Sundays when the master's family was away at church and visiting friends. Lily Ann gathered other enslaved children and headed to the nearby woods. There, in a hidden spot, she taught them what she knew. Lily Ann formed a letter A with twigs, then helped the others make their own. She sang out the A sound, and the new learners repeated after her. Her students traced the letters with their fingers to help them remember. As the group learned more letters, they formed words and then sentences. News of Lily Ann's teaching spread, and more people of all ages joined her. Whenever her students mastered a new skill, Lily Ann felt a burst of hope for a better future for them. For many years, Lily Ann looked forward to teaching secretly every Sunday. Then her life was shattered overnight. Her master died, and his property was divided and auctioned off. Lily Ann was sold down the Mississippi River to a plantation near Natchez, Mississippi. Mississippi was not like Kentucky. In the lower South, cotton was king, and hundreds of thousands of enslaved people were forced to work in the fields from dawn until the sun went down. For the first time, Lily Ann had to toil in the cotton fields. She was not used to the hard physical labor and blazing sun, and struggled to keep up with the others. Day after day, the overseer whipped her. Lily Ann thought she would die from such cruel whippings. As Lily Ann hoed row after row of cotton, she staggered with weakness. The master finally noticed how ill she was and sent Lily Ann to work in the kitchen of his big house in Natchez. Lily Ann met a kind man named Oliver Granderson. After a few years, the couple had a son. While working long hours for her master, Lily Ann wondered about her son's future. She realized she missed teaching and seeing her students' hopeful faces as they learned to read and write. She wanted to give others that hope again and decided to start another school. This time, however, the risks were much higher. It was illegal in Mississippi for enslaved people to learn to read and write. Landowners feared that if the enslaved could read, they would discover that some Northerners wanted slavery abolished. This might lead to rebellion against the owners. Many southern states required enslaved people to carry a pass from their master any time they traveled away from home. Knowing how to write would let them create their own passes, fool the authorities, and escape to freedom. The punishment, if Lily Ann was found teaching, would be 39 lashes with a whip for both her and her students. Despite the risks, Lily Ann was determined to give her people the paths to freedom that education made possible.
Fun fact, in the South, it's estimated that only 10% of enslaved people were literate. There was a growing belief that an enslaved, educated person was a dangerous person.
That's because knowledge is power, and slave owners certainly didn't want to give up any power.
Fun fact, in 1831, all slave states except Maryland, Kentucky, and Tennessee passed laws against teaching slaves to read and write.
Do you know what happened to slaves that were caught reading or writing?
Frequently, some sort of disfigurement, like having the forefinger cut off a right hand.
I noticed that you didn't claim that was a fun fact.
It's more like a sad fact.
For her new school, Lily Ann would need to find a place hidden from prying eyes. Luckily, she knew Natchez well from going to the market and running errands for her master. She found a secluded cabin off a back alley in town. Classes would have to be held in the middle of the night to avoid getting caught. Word of Lily Ann's midnight school spread quickly through the town's enslaved community. Details about the school were whispered to carriage drivers, and they in turn shared the news with others as they traveled around town. After toiling for their masters all day, Lily Ann's students slipped nervously into the town's shadowy light. Like alley cats, they crept through the darkness. They took routes to keep from giving away their destination if they were ever followed. Lily Ann hated leaving Oliver and their young son every night, but she was willing to make the sacrifice to help others. She got to the school first to greet her new learners and ease their fears. Once the students arrived, they sealed the windows and doors to avoid being discovered. Every noise in the night reminded them of the painful punishment they faced if they were ever found out. No matter how tired everyone was from a long day's work, Lily Ann's students, young and old, were eager to learn. They carefully studied the ragged spelling book that Lily Ann had secretly brought from Kentucky. She helped her pupils sound out the letters and words, calming their jitters with her quiet voice and motherly face. Crowded around their midnight teacher, the group took turns reading the Bible. Sometimes they brought books or newspapers taken from their owners' houses. Using sticks dipped in homemade ink, the new learners practiced writing their name on slate smoothed from pine. One day, a student had a surprise for Lily Ann. Slowly, he wrote the word freedom. The others hurried to copy the new word. Lily Ann's eyes flooded with tears of joy. Lily Ann's belief that education was the key to a better future only grew stronger over the years. She took on 12 students at a time and taught them all she could. Then she shared with another 12. Her students went on to share what they learned with their families, who beamed with pride that one of their own could read and write. Some students started secret schools of their own. Others used their new skills to write passes to escape to freedom in the North, just as Lily Ann had hoped they would. For 7 years, Lily Ann and her students risked their safety and stayed up half the night practicing their lessons. Hundreds of enslaved people learned to read and write under their midnight teacher's patient but passionate guidance. Then one dark, moonless night, a slave patrol noticed a tiny ray of light coming from the hidden cabin. The student guarding the door heard the patroller's horses and alerted those inside to snuff out their lights and hide their books. It was too late. The patrollers crashed through the door. Lily Ann and her students froze, expecting to be punished right on the spot. The patrol leader ordered the school closed and told everyone to go straight home. He warned Lily Ann and her students to expect 39 lashes with a whip the next day.
Can you imagine what it'd be like if you got 39 lashes from a whip just because you went to school?
I don't know anyone that would have gone to school.
It really puts it into perspective when your education places you in a life or death situation.
Why would you put yourself in harm's way?
This was an example of being selfless and doing things for future generations.
How so?
Enslaved people could see the immediate benefit of being able to read, how even a small education could make their lives easier.
So what does that have to do with future generations?
Slavery was a vicious cycle with no end in sight. If you were able to have your children break free through education, how could you not take that chance?
The discovery of the school created a great deal of commotion among Lily Ann's master, the other slave owners, and local and state officials. They debated what to do with Lily Ann and her students. Lily Ann trembled with dread. Would they be whipped for wanting to learn? Would she be separated from Oliver and her son? Despite all her fears, Lily Ann did not regret starting her school. Finally, after weeks of waiting and worrying, an official came to speak to Lily Ann's master. Lily Ann held her breath, expecting the worst. To her surprise, the official told her master that Lily Ann could teach, as authorities found no law against a slave teaching a slave. Neither she nor her students would be punished. Lily Ann couldn't believe her ears. She took the good news as a direct answer to her prayers and was determined more than ever to educate her people. She reopened her school and started a Sabbath church school as well. Lily Ann was still teaching when a civil war began between the northern and the southern states. The two sides disagreed on whether slavery should be allowed in the nation's new territories. Because President Abraham Lincoln opposed the spread of slavery, the southern states broke away from the United States to form the Confederate States of America. The northern states remained the United States of America, or the Union. In 1863, Union soldiers captured Natchez. They were surprised to find not only a school taught by Lily Ann, but a great number of educated enslaved people in the town too. Union Army chaplain Joseph Warren visited Lily Ann's school and was very much impressed by it. He praised her as a remarkable woman who taught many to read at the risk of her life. The Union takeover brought the freedom promised by the Emancipation Proclamation to Natchez. Lily Ann and her family celebrated with a wedding. After being together for many years, on July 20th, 1864, Lily Ann and Oliver were legally married. It was a right that was previously denied to those enslaved. Lily Ann was also free to enjoy her love of learning any time she pleased. Sitting on the porch, she proudly read out loud to her family. After the Civil War ended in 1865, newly freed people of all ages longed for an education. Without the slave laws that forced them to study in secret, they wanted their schools to be open and available the entire year. Most teachers from the North, however, wouldn't stand the steamy heat and went home for the summer. Lily Ann shared her students' great enthusiasm for learning. During the summer of 1865, she and another formerly enslaved woman taught a class of 275 students. Lily Ann's passion for education didn't stop there. She continued to teach and promote learning until late in her life. Lily Ann Granderson's inspiration lives on today through all the generations changed forever by her dedication to helping others gain freedom and improve their lives through education.
Fun fact, freed people's demand for education served as the catalyst for bringing public schooling to the South. The demand was so great, every southern state would revamp its constitution to include provisions for public schools for not only African American children, but for all children, regardless of race, gender, class, or previous condition of servitude.
Now there's a fun fact, not just a depressing part of our past.
Sure, a lot of things that happen in this book are bad, but I prefer to think of this book as a good thing.
Such as focusing on the positives that came out of such despair.
Exactly, like how people overcame so much and persevered.
And hopefully we learn from our past so we don't make the same mistakes in the future.
Fun fact, after the Civil War, African Americans enjoyed a period when they were allowed to vote, actively participate in their own political process, acquire the land of former owners, and seek their own employment, and use accommodations for the first time.
I love it! And speaking of that, if you love this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'm Adam.
Now I'm Chester.
And this is
Where there's a Williams,
there's a way.
Afterward. In historical records, Lily Ann Granderson is sometimes identified by the first name Lily, Lily, or Lila, the last name Grandison, or the name Milla Grandson. Her exact year of birth is unknown, although several historical documents support 1821, including her death notice, which states that she was 68 when she died in 1889. There are few records regarding her family history, and it is not known if anyone of Lily Ann's family went with her when she was sold as a young child to an owner in Kentucky. During slavery, family members often were sold to different owners, tearing loved ones apart. It is unclear why Lily Ann and her students were not punished when her midnight school was discovered, even though an official said they found no law against a slave teaching a slave. The Mississippi Code of 1823 clearly banned the practice. Perhaps Lily Ann's owner, who had the final authority over his property, felt she would not turn others against slavery and therefore chose not to punish her. Also, in cities, laws against learning to read and write were not always as strictly enforced in rural areas. Whatever the reason, Lily Ann was overjoyed to be able to continue to teach and improve the lives of countless people. As the Civil War came to an end in 1865, Lily Ann knew she needed more knowledge to keep ahead of her students. She attended a church-sponsored school for newly freed women in the afternoon and taught in the morning. When a system of public schools began in Mississippi in 1870, she joined its staff and taught at union schools for many years. In the late 1870s, Lily Ann took on another educational challenge. The Baptist Church wanted to create a seminary in Natchez to train black teachers and ministers, but to succeed, it needed wide community support. Lily Ann led the effort, going from home to home, talking up the school and encouraging young people to enroll. By the end of the first school year, in 1878, 60 students attended Natchez Seminary, now Jackson State University. Lily Ann also served as a deaconess for Pine Street Baptist Church and a trustee of the Jacobs Benevolent Society. Lily Ann and Oliver Granderson had 3 children together. The couple proudly watched their own children attend school. Their son David, born around 1846, became a teacher and a minister after attending Oberlin College in Ohio. Their daughter, Lily Ann, born on February 25, 1862, headed up the first class of graduates from Natchez Seminary, the school her mother had championed. And like her mother, she dedicated her life to teaching and church work. Unfortunately, nothing is known about the couple's third child. Lily Ann Granderson died of tuberculosis on April 27, 1889, and was buried in Natchez City Cemetery. Today, she and her midnight school are remembered during Civil War living history events in Natchez. In a visit of the Chicago home of Lily Ann's great-granddaughter Clara May Bray and her great-great-grandson Aegis Bray Jr., both now deceased, they remarked on the author that education had been important in the family for as long as they could remember. The family's history spotlights the influence Lily Ann had through many generations. In 1901, Lily Ann's granddaughter, Jane Anna Granderson, was one of the first 2 college graduates of Spelman Seminary, now Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. Lily Ann's grandson, Charles C. Diggs Sr., who moved to Detroit, Michigan, was a wealthy businessman and community activist and became the first African-American Democrat elected to the Michigan State Senate in 1936. Lily Ann's great-grandson, Charles C. Diggs Jr., was the first African-American to represent Michigan in the United States Congress, serving from 1955 to 1980. He was the founder and the first chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, a voice for African-American issues. We can only imagine the many achievements Lily Ann's students and their families went on to accomplish because of their education, the everlasting legacy of a brave and dedicated teacher. Did you know high school didn't exist until the Great Depression? During this time, the job-strapped communities decided it would be to their advantage to keep teenagers in class and out of the workforce where they would be low-cost competition to adults.